This is Awakening on Main Street, Chapter 3, The Laboratory of Doubt. Alina Rodriguez stood at her kitchen window, watching steam rise from her coffee cup in spirals that reminded her of the cellular structures that she studied under magnification. The morning light filtered through rain-streaked glass, casting prismatic patterns on the white countertop, a visual representation of the refraction experiments that had occupied her thoughts for weeks. 3 months had passed since her last encounter with the stranger, and the integration of mystical experiences with her scientific worldview continued to create internal tensions that manifested in the smallest details of her daily routine. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted a cup, a physiological response she observed with the same clinical detachment she brought to studying these tissue samples. The tremor wasn't caffeine-induced. She had eliminated variables by reducing her intake to precise measurements, but rather emerged from the cognitive dissonance between her academic training and the impossible experiences that had reorganized her understanding of consciousness itself. Each morning brought the same ritual, careful observation of phenomena that defied conventional explanation, followed by attempts to construct theoretical frameworks that could accommodate both quantum mechanics and the expanded awareness she had developed through her awakening or that she had experienced since her awakening began. The apartment around her reflected this integration struggle. Scientific journals lay scattered across her dining table, their margins filled with notes written in her precise handwriting, observations about consciousness-matter interactions that would have been dismissed as fantasy by her colleagues just 6 months ago. The stranger's words echoed in her memory. Science is consciousness itself, studying itself through measurement and analysis. But what happens when consciousness recognizing its own role in what it measures? At the same time, a statement that had seemed like one of those paradoxical utterances that sounded profound, but meant nothing practical. Now, after 3 months of trying to reconcile her empirical training with direct experiences of expanded awareness, Elena she was beginning to understand. Every scientific observation involved the interaction between consciousness and matter, observer and the observed, subjective awareness and objective phenomena. The assumed separation between these domains formed the foundation of scientific methodology. Yet Elena had experienced states of consciousness where this separation revealed itself as a convenient fiction rather than an accurate description of reality's fundamental nature. Her doctoral work in cellular biology had earned recognition precisely because she could document cellular behavior with mathematical precision while remaining open to observations that didn't fit the current theoretical models. The experiences following her encounter with the stranger had pushed this flexibility beyond its comfortable limits, demanding integration of data that existed outside the bounds of peer-reviewed literature and reproducible experimental conditions. She moved through her apartment with measured pace of someone conducting a walking meditation, each step deliberate and conscious. The hardwood floors had been installed by the previous tenant, but over recent months, Elena had begun to notice their grain patterns had information, mathematical relationships that seemed to encode instructions for conscious development. This observation troubled her scientific mind, which recognized pattern-seeking behavior as a common cognitive bias, while simultaneously exciting her evolving awareness that reality operated according to principles more complex than conventional materialism acknowledged. Her morning routine had evolved into a form of conscious experimentation. Coffee preparation became an opportunity to study the relationship between intention and physical phenomena. As she ground beans, she observed how the quality of her attention affected the uniformity of particle size, how the brewing water responded to different emotional states during the heating process. These observations fell outside the parameters of controlled scientific investigation, yet they provided reproducible results that challenged the assumption of consciousness matter separation that formed the foundation of her academic training. Lena's reflection was interrupted by the distinctive chime of her smartphone, a notification sound she'd customized to match the harmonic frequencies Maya had discovered in the group explorations. The message was from Dr. Sarah Chen, her research supervisor at the university laboratory, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss Elena's recent work patterns. Elena felt her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. Her colleagues had begun noticing changes in her research focus, subtle shifts toward investigations that bordered on consciousness studies rather than conventional cellular biology. Dr. Chen's concern was understandable from a professional standpoint. Elena's recent proposals had included requests for funding to study observer effects in cellular mitosis and consciousness matter interaction in biological systems, topics that existed on the periphery of accepted scientific inquiry. Elena knew her reputation as a serious researcher had been built on her ability to produce quantifiable results with within established experimental parameters, and her recent interest appeared to represent a departure from that foundation toward territories that academic institutions approached with extreme caution. Yet, she could not ignore the evidence of her own eyes that she had witnessed during her awakening experiences. The morning's scheduled laboratory work involved examining tumor cells, and these samples were from recent biopsies. That had once represented the cutting edge of her research interest. Cancer cells, she had learned, exhibited behavior patterns that seemed to violate normal cellular constraints, unlimited replication, resistance to programmed death signals, the ability to recruit normal cells to support malignant growth. But her recent observations during expanded states of awareness had revealed additional dimensions to these behaviors that conventional oncology couldn't acknowledge. Malignant cells appeared to operate according to different informational principles than healthy tissue, as if they had access to organizational templates that normal cells couldn't access. During meditative states that resembled the consciousness expansion she had experienced with the stranger, Elena could observe what appeared to be information patterns, geometric structures that seemed to instruct cellular behavior from outside the conventional biochemical framework. These patterns looked almost like consciousness fragments that had become separated from their larger informational context, creating autonomous behavior routines that serve destructive rather than integrative purposes. This observation had profound implications that Elena barely dared to consider. If consciousness operated as a field phenomenon that influenced physical matter through information transfer, then material and emotional states might have more direct effects on health than conventional medicine acknowledged. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions might create informational environments that predisposed cellular systems toward malignant transformation. Conversely, states of expanded awareness and emotional integration might support cellular health, though mechanisms that transcended biochemical intervention. Elena dressed for work with unusual care, aware that her professional appearance served as armor against the vulnerability that she felt when bridging domains of knowledge that weren't supposed to connect. Her laboratory coat always had represented membership in a community of rational inquiry, but now it felt like a costume that concealed her actual investigations. She was becoming a double agent in her own life, maintaining the appearance of conventional research while secretly exploring territories that could undermine her professional credibility. The walk to the university took her through the same urban landscape that she had traversed for 3 years, but her perception of the environment had undergone subtle transformation. Buildings seemed to pulse with the collective emotional states of their occupants. Traffic patterns appeared to follow rhythms that connected to the larger cycles of urban consciousness. Even the seemingly random distribution of litter on sidewalks began to reveal organizational principles that suggested intelligence operating at scales beyond individual human awareness. These perceptions troubled Elena's scientific skepticism, which recognized the human tendency to impose meaning on random phenomena. Pattern recognition had been essential to survival throughout evolutionary history, but it could also create false correlations between unrelated events. Elena understood the psychological mechanisms that generated conspiracy theories, mystical experiences, and other forms of meaning that exceeded factual foundations. Yet her observations provided consistent, reproducible data that couldn't be dismissed as wishful thinking or cognitive error. During meditative states, she could perceive information patterns that predicted cellular behavior, urban traffic flows, and social interactions with remarkable accuracy. These perceptions operated through mechanisms that exceeded her current theoretical understanding, but they produced results that could be verified through conventional scientific methodology. Dr. Chen was waiting in her office, her expression carrying the professional concern of a supervisor who had noticed changes in a previously reliable research associate. Elena had learned to read these expressions during her graduate training, subtle indicators of institutional pressure, funding concerns, and the complex politics that govern scientific careers. Dr. Chen's office walls displayed the usual academic credentials, framed degrees, published papers, photographs from professional conferences. These symbols represented success navigation of scientific bureaucracy, achievement within established parameters of acceptable inquiry. Elena, Dr. Chen began. Her voice carried the careful neutrality that preceded difficult conversations. I've been reviewing your recent research proposals, and I'm concerned about the direction of your investigations. Your work has always been exemplary with established parameters, but these new interests appear to take you into territories that, and she paused, searching for diplomatic language, that may not align with our department's research priorities or funding opportunities. Helena felt her throat constrict with a familiar fear, not just professional anxiety, but the deeper terror that had been seen as an intellectually unstable, as of having carefully constructed competence questioned by peers whose respect she had worked years to earn. Her awakening experiences had provided evidence of phenomenon that challenged conventional understanding, but they couldn't be shared as documentation in institutional settings without appearing delusional or methodologically flawed. I understand your concern, Elena replied, her voice steadily in spite of internal turbulence. My recent interests have expanded beyond traditional parameters, but I believe they represent natural evolution of consciousness studies within biological research. The relationship between observer effects and cellular behavior has significant implications for understanding health and disease that haven't been adequately explored through conventional methodologies. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. Her expression revealed polite skepticism. Observer effects are recognized phenomenon in quantum physics, but their application to biological systems remains speculative at best. Our department's reputation depends on research that meets rigorous peer review standards, and I'm concerned that pursuing these directions might compromise your professional development. Elena recognized the institutional pressure behind Dr. Chen's words. Academic departments operate according to conservative principles that prioritize reputation over innovation, establish funding patterns over exploratory research. Professors who ventured too far from the acceptable parameters risk not only their own careers, but the institutional standing that that supported their colleagues' work. Elena's explorations threatened to associate their department with fringe science that could affect grant applications and professional relationships. I've observed what appear to be correlations between observer states and cellular behavior patterns, Elena said, maintaining scientific vocabulary while hinting at deeper discoveries. These correlations suggest that consciousness may influence biological systems through mechanisms that haven't been adequately investigated. I would like to design experiments that test these relationships under controlled conditions, using standardized meditation techniques to create reproducible observer states and measuring cellular responses through conventional biochemical analysis. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. This sounds like an interesting application of psychonumerology research. There's an established literature on the relationship between mental states and immune function and investigating consciousness effects on cellular behavior that could represent a legitimate extension of that work. But you would need to frame your proposal in terms of existing research paradigms and ensure that your methodology meets standard criteria for reproducibility and peer review. Elena felt simultaneous relief and frustration. Dr. Chen was offering a path for pursuing consciousness matter research within acceptable institutional parameters, but the constraints would necessarily limit investigation of the phenomena that she had observed during her awakening experiences. The expanded awareness she had developed revealed informational dimensions of reality that couldn't be captured through conventional biochemical analysis. Consciousness matter relationships that operated according to principles exceeding current scientific understanding. I appreciate your guidance, Elena said. I'll revise my proposal to align with established research frameworks and ensure that methodology meets departmental standards. But I would also like to discuss the possibility of expanding our investigative parameters to include phenomena that may not fit current theoretical models. Dr. Chen smiled with the patience of someone who had mentored many graduate students through the challenges of balancing professional pragmatism. Elena, your enthusiasm for expanding knowledge is commendable, but remember that scientific careers are built on establishing credibility through incremental contributions to accepted understanding. Once you've demonstrated competence within established parameters, there will be opportunities to explore more speculative territories. Elena recognized the wisdom in Dr. Chen's counsel, but she also understood its limitations. The phenomena that she observed during her awakening existed outside the boundaries of incremental research, required investigation of consciousness matter relationships that challenged foundational assumptions of scientific materialism. Establishing credibility within current paradigms might provide professional security, but it could also trap her in theoretical frameworks that precluded investigation of the most scientific discoveries. The meeting concluded with Elena's commitment to revise her research proposals and Dr. Chen's promise to support investigations that balanced innovation with institutional acceptability. Elena walked through the laboratory hallways with renewed awareness of the institutional pressures that shape scientific inquiry, the subtle ways that career concerns influenced researchers' willingness to explore phenomena that challenged established understanding. Her laboratory bench was arranged with the precise organization she had maintained throughout her graduate training. Pipettes arranged by volume, reagents labeled and dated, notebooks documenting every experimental procedure. This order represents mastery of scientific methodology, the disciplined attention to detail that enabled reliable research results. But it also reflected assumptions about the nature of reality and that her recent experiences had systemically undermined. Elena began preparing cell cultures for microscopic analysis, following procedures she had performed hundreds of times, but now each step carried additional significance as she considered how observer consciousness might influence the experimental process. Her emotional state, while handling cellular samples, could affect their behavior patterns. Her intentions while preparing reagents could influence chemical reactions. Her expectations while observing results could shape the phenomena she documented. These possibilities challenged the fundamental assumption of scientific objectivity, the belief that proper methodology could eliminate observer effects and reveal natural phenomena as they existed independent of human consciousness. Elena recognized that acknowledging observer-dependent aspects of scientific investigation could undermine the epistemology, the foundations that legitimated institutional science. But she also understood that ignoring these effects might limit understanding of phenomena that operate according to consciousness matter principles. Through the conventional microscope, Elena observed cellular division processes that followed predictable patterns of DNA replication, organelle distribution, and membrane formation. These observations align with established understanding of mitotic mechanisms and represented the kind of reliable data that supported published research. But during the meditative states, she had learned to access, since her awakening, she could perceive additional dimensions of the same processes, information patterns that seemed to coordinate cellular behavior from outside conventional biochemical frameworks. The cancer cells she was studying exhibited the same malignant characteristics that oncology textbooks described: unlimited replicative potential, resistance to growth inhibition signals, evasion of programmed cell death. But her expanded awareness revealed these behaviors as expressions of informational patterns that appeared disconnected from larger organizational principles that governed healthy tissue. Malignant cells seemed to operate according to fragmented consciousness that had lost connection to the integrative awareness that coordinated normal physiological function. Elena realized she was developing a theoretical framework that connected consciousness studies with medical research in ways that could revolutionize understanding of health and disease. If cancer represented a form of consciousness fragmentation that expressed itself through cellular behavior, then therapeutic approaches that addressed informational and awareness-based dimensions of illness might provide more effective treatment than interventions focused solely on biochemical mechanisms. But these insights existed beyond the boundaries of acceptable scientific discourse. Elena could document cellular behaviors that correlated with observer states, but she couldn't publish observations about consciousness matter interactions without appearing to violate scientific objectivity. She could propose research investigating meditation effects on immune function, but she couldn't describe the effect perception of informational fields that influence biological systems. Elena spent that afternoon documenting cellular analysis results through conventional methodology while simultaneously recording her observations from her expanded awareness states in a private notebook that would never be submitted for peer review. The double documentation represented her dual experience, her dual existence as an institutional scientist pursuing conventional research while secretly exploring territories that could undermine her professional credibility. As the workday concluded, Elena felt the familiar exhaustion that resulted from maintaining dual identities. The publicly acceptable researcher who operated within established parameters, and the private investigator exploring consciousness matter relationships that exceeded current scientific understandings. Her colleagues saw someone who appeared competent and reliable within institutional frameworks, but who was gradually losing interest in research that ignored the most significant dimensions of biological phenomena. Elena walked home through the city streets that seemed increasingly alive with informational patterns that connected individual consciousness to collective urban awareness. Traffic flows responded to the emotional states of drivers. Building architectures reflected the psychological conditions of their inhabitants. Even the distribution of litter appeared to follow organizational principles that suggested intelligence operating at scales beyond individual human awareness. These perceptions represented either expanding sensitivity to information that had always existed or progressive deterioration of rational discrimination between meaningful patterns and random phenomena. Elena understood the psychological mechanisms that generated mystical experiences, conspiracy theories, and other forms of meaning-making that exceeded factual foundations. Yet her observations provided consistent, reproducible data that couldn't be dismissed as wishful thinking or cognitive error. Her apartment welcomed her with the familiar arrangement of scientific journals, research notes, and the meditation cushion that had become her bridge between academic respectability and the territories of investigation that existed beyond institutional science. Elena prepared dinner with conscious attention to each step of food prep, observing how her emotional state influenced the cooking process, how intention affected the nutritional value of the ingredients. These investigations fell outside the conventional nutritional science, but they provided insights that enhanced both the flavor and the nourishing quality of her meals. That evening, Elena sat at her desk, reviewing the day's observations and considering how to balance professional survival with authentic investigation of phenomena that challenged established understanding. She opened her laptop and began drafting a research proposal that framed consciousness matter investigations in terms of psychonumeronology studies like that, using acceptable scientific language to explore questions that exceeded conventional parameters. The proposal described experiments that would investigate observer effects on cellular behavior through standardized meditation techniques and conventional biochemical analysis. The methodology met institutional requirements for controlled investigation while creating opportunities to study consciousness-matter relationships that operated through mechanisms beyond current theoretical understanding. Elena recognized that she was becoming a translator between paradigms, someone who could frame experiences of expanded awareness in language that institutional science could begin to investigate. This role required maintaining credibility within established frameworks while gradually introducing concepts that challenged foundational assumptions of scientific materialism. The work was lonely and professionally risky, but Elena understood that paradigm shifts in science occurred through individuals willing to investigate phenomena that exceeded current understanding. Her observations during expanded awareness states represented preliminary data for investigations that could eventually revolutionize understanding of consciousness-matter relationships and their implications for health, disease, and human potential. As she prepared for sleep, Elena felt her consciousness naturally expanding beyond the boundaries of individual identity toward connection with larger patterns of awareness that unified biological systems, urban environments, and cosmic processes through informational relationships that her awakening had revealed as the fundamental fabric of reality itself. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to translate these experiences into forms that institutional science could begin to investigate, slowly bridging or building bridges between paradigms that would eventually support comprehensive understanding of consciousness-matter relationships. Elena awoke the next morning with unusual clarity about her path forward. The night's sleep had continued the pattern of expanded awareness that she had experienced since her encounter with the stranger, but now her dreams seemed to carry specific information about how to navigate the integration of mystical experience with scientific methodology. She lay in bed for several minutes, allowing the dream imagery to crystallize into conscious understanding before rising to begin another day of balancing institutional research with authentic investigation. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed someone who appeared professionally competent, but who carried within herself knowledge that challenged the foundations of scientific materialism. Alina understood that she was becoming a pioneer in territories that hadn't been mapped by academic institutions, someone who would need to develop methodologies for investigating consciousness-matter relationships that operated beyond conventional parameters of scientific objectivity. The morning's first decision involved whether to attend the department faculty meeting scheduled for later that day. These meetings typically focused on administrative concerns, funding applications, and coordination of research projects within established parameters. Elena's recent interest had begun to isolate her from these conventional academic activities, but she also recognized the importance of maintaining collegial relationships that could eventually support her innovative investigations. She decided to attend the meeting and use it as an opportunity to gauge her colleagues' readiness for consciousness-related research presented through acceptable scientific frameworks. During breakfast, Elena reviewed the proposal that she had drafted the night before, refining the language that could communicate her genuine research interest while avoiding vocabulary that would trigger institutional resistance. The challenge was to present consciousness matter investigations as natural extensions of established psychonumerology research that departs rather than departures from scientific materialism. Elena walked to the university with renewed confidence in her role as a bridge between paradigms, someone who could translate experiences of expanded awareness into research programs that met economic standards while creating opportunities to explore phenomena that exceeded current understanding. The laboratory building appeared before her as a symbol of collective human inquiry, institutional frameworks that supported the expansion of knowledge through systemic investigation. Elena understood that science progressed through paradigm shifts that initially challenged established understanding, and she was prepared to contribute to these shifts through research that investigated consciousness matter relationships with the same methodological rigor that had characterized her previous work in cellular biology. As she entered the building, Elena felt her commitment to this path represented not just professional development, but a form of service to human understanding, contributing to paradigm shifts that would eventually transform how science approached the fundamental questions of consciousness, health, and the nature of reality itself. Elena understood that this work required patience, courage, and the willingness to maintain integrity to direct experience, even when it challenged acceptable and established frameworks of acceptable inquiry. She was prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, and her role as a bridge between scientific materialism and expanded understanding of consciousness-matter relationships that operated through informational patterns too complex for current theoretical models to accommodate. Her commitment carried the quiet authority of someone who had discovered their authentic purpose, of someone who understood that their personal development and professional contribution were aspects of the same fundamental work, the expansion of human understanding through the courageous investigation of phenomena that challenged comfortable assumptions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the physical world. Elena Rodriguez, scientist and reluctant pioneer, she walked toward another day of impossible, essential work, building bridges between paradigms that would eventually support comprehensive understanding of how consciousness and matter interacted through principles that institutional science was only beginning to acknowledge as legitimate territories for systemic investigation.